Finally, a deal. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dade Phelan reach an agreement to provide Texans property tax relief after their month-long standoff at the Capitol. Turning up the heat, the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz intensifies. State Senator Gutierrez enters the race 2 months after North Texas Congressman Colin Allred launched his bid. We asked Gutierrez about his priorities and how he'll win. And pushing back, conservative groups launch billboards and a website in an effort to defend impeached and suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts right now. Hello and welcome. Property tax relief will soon be on the way to Texas home and business owners. The Texas legislature passed 3 bills aimed at cutting the school portion of your property tax bill. It comes after a new deal struck earlier this week between Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dade Phelan, following a month-long standoff between them and Governor Greg Abbott.
This is a historic day for the state of Texas.
After months of contentious debate, House Speaker Dade Phelan celebrated the Texas legislature's newly passed property tax relief legislation worth $18 billion. The money will come from the nearly $33 billion budget surplus. Here's what the package does. It reduces the school property tax rate for all homeowners and business properties. The homestead exemption will increase to $100,000 for most homeowners and to $110,000 for homeowners over 65 and the disabled. For a home valued at $330,000, which is the average in Texas, lawmakers say that's worth about $2,600 in savings during the first 2 years for most homeowners and about $3,000 for the first 2 years for homeowners over 65 and the disabled. The legislation also limits increases on appraised values for commercial and non-homesteaded residential properties and provides savings on franchise tax for small businesses. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick says once voters approve in November, the property tax cuts will be retroactive to this year.
The screen is all green, like the money our taxpayers are going to receive.
The bills don't provide direct relief to renters, as some House Democrats proposed last week and tried to add to the legislation on Thursday.
So let's think about the 37.6% of Texans who rent their home and make sure that we have that trickle-down effect to our renters.
That measure and another proposed amendment to give teachers raises or bonuses failed. But Republican leaders say this issue will be considered in a third special session this fall. In the Senate, the bills passed unanimously and received bipartisan support.
It is an excellent bill. It is a balanced approach. It is fair.
It took a second special session to get property tax relief passed. Speaker Phelan congratulated the lieutenant governor after the Senate approved the final bill, and both men referred to their long and public legislative battle.
And the truth is, when you have $18 billion, members, you don't decide it in 6 days or 6 weeks or 6 months. And of all the different variations of bills that you sent to us and we sent you, this is the best bill of them all.
We knew this would be the most contentious issue that we face, was how to return these dollars to the taxpayers. And we had many competing ideas. The Senate had theirs, the governor had his, and we had ours, right? But we all came together.
After the House passed the bills, we spoke with Speaker Dade Phelan about this new deal, when lawmakers will provide new money for public schools and teacher pay raises and more. The Texas legislature passed $18 billion worth of property tax relief, and the property tax cuts will be felt this year. They'll be retroactive to this year. My question to you is this sustainable and lasting relief? And what will the state do to make sure that local property taxes for schools won't creep back up?
I do think it's sustainable. I think this economy we have in Texas is, 1 year we're the 11th largest economy, then we're the 10th largest economy, and now we're the 9th largest economy in the world. People are moving here, 1,200 people a day. Major announcements for new developments and new investments in Texas, new headquarters moving to Texas. I do think it's sustainable, and I do think this was a great opportunity to provide much needed property tax relief to all Texans, and that's exactly what this package of bills accomplished.
And it will keep local property taxes for schools creeping back up?
Well, that our commitment is to buy down through compression, and of course, we're going to hold harmless the homestead increase, and also the 20% limit on appraised values for properties below 5 million that are not homesteads. Yes, we are holding these ISDs harmless on all those provisions. That is a commitment of the state of Texas, and our commitment is going forward, 27 to 2029, and hopefully each session after that.
You said last night that you knew trying to figure out a way to give people back money, the residents back, would be the most contentious issue. A lot of people, though, I spoke with were still very surprised about it taking 2 special sessions to get this done. Why weren't you and the lieutenant governor and governor on the same page from the start?
It's a great question, but with record surplus comes a record expectations, and every member has their own idea that they want to bring forward, and that's how this deliberative body works in the House, and that's how it works in the Senate. Of course, the governor had ideas as well, and we were very respectful of those. And where we landed was a compromise between both the House, the Senate, and the governor, and it ended up being the best package that we've had going back to January. So it was worth the wait. We needed to get it right, but we had to get it done in time to allow the voters to approve these ideas in the November constitutional amendment election, which is forthcoming. So they would have an opportunity to approve all these ideas that we put forth. But again, when you got $34 billion in surplus, you're going to have a lot of expectations of how to spend those dollars. And we finally landed where we were, and we had tremendous support in the Texas House. And of course, the Senate had tremendous support as well, and the governor is looking forward to signing the bill. So I think we landed in the right spot.
Were you surprised at how contentious this became?
Not at all. Just to give you a quick idea, going back to last October of 2021, we had $17 billion from the federal government in COVID relief money, $17 billion. Through the House and Senate, we had $1.7 trillion in budget requests for that $17 billion. So I knew going into this session with $34 billion in state funds that there was going to be a lot of high expectations, both in the House and the Senate, but we navigated through it. And the governor credit for having a laser focused special session number 2 that just dealt with property tax relief. It got us all on the same page.
Some House Democrats wanted renters to get a direct relief. Why wasn't that included in this? Because they are 38% of all Texans are renters.
Sure, they will. I firmly believe they will see relief. The multifamily housing market is a very competitive market, and when the cost of doing business is taxes, is one of the main drivers of the cost of doing business is taxes. And when you have an apartment on one side of the street that passes on $50, $100, $200 a month savings, or signing bonus savings, or 2 months of free rent because of this property tax relief, you're going to see other apartment complexes in that neighborhood doing the exact same thing. There's been articles just as recently as this week using Harris County as an example, that their rents have not only plateaued, but they've actually started to decrease. And then when you also have developers looking at the cost of doing business decreasing because of the property tax relief, they're more likely to invest in that market sector. And then you'll see a greater supply of multifamily housing units, further driving down the costs of those rents.
The Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, said the House did not want to include teacher raises or bonuses in this legislation. Why is that the case? And will teachers get bonuses and or raises that are permanent in the 3rd special session that's called in the fall? And if so, about how much do you think?
First of all, thank you. Great question. And allow me to clarify. One, it was not on the call. The governor did not include anything related to public education on this call for this 2nd special session. So it was not germane. And in the House rules, were very explicit that if something was not germane to the call, it shall not be brought up. And the Lieutenant Governor agreed yesterday when the HJR went back to the Senate. He actually ruled on a point of order, sustained, saying that teacher pay increase is not germane to HJR 2. I also want to work with the Senate on a teacher pay increase that is sustainable over a long period of time. In essence, the previously floated the idea about teacher pay increase from the special session number one, basically ended up being a 13th check, which is admirable, and I'm sure teachers would appreciate. But if you want to attract new teachers to the profession and you want to keep teachers in the profession, I think they need more predictability and a long-term solution when it comes to pay increase. The House is committed to increasing the pay for teachers. I firmly believe we have the votes for that. And I feel like there might be another special session this fall that deals with public education, of which would include teacher pay increase.
Any indication of how much?
There's $5 billion set aside right now for public education finance, and that could be basic allotment, that could be teacher pay increase, that could be an increase in the school safety allotment. So that's going to be debated if and when we come back. That is the governor's decision, but it could be sometime this fall where we bring up all those issues in a more holistic approach.
As you know, Governor Abbott vetoed 77 bills, some of them in the House. How did that go over with House members, and will lawmakers have a chance to revive those vetoed bills?
That will also be the discretion of the governor as he dictates what is on a call and what is not on a call. I'm sure there's some House members who've gone over to him and are lobbying to have their babies added back to the call so they can have a second chance to revisit. Some of those were tax bills that we may be able to revisit in a special as well and talk a little bit more about taxes if the voters want us to do that when we go back home and listen to them for the months of August and September. So again, yeah, that's incumbent upon the House members to lobby the governor and to have those added to the call.
I wanted to ask you about the political fallout to the impeachment of Ken Paxton, and specifically on Republican state representatives. Some of them are being primaried, as you know. One member, Glenn Rogers, up here in the North Texas region, there are billboards now going out saying he voted along with Democrats. Is this fair? What's your reaction?
It's not fair at all, Jack. It's a sad state of affairs. The House did the right thing. The Attorney General and his staff came to the House and Senate and asked for $3.3 million to settle a lawsuit when he wrongfully terminated some state employees that he recruited, state employees that were believers in Ken Paxton, state employees that were staunch conservatives. And he terminated their employment. And then he wanted us to give him $3.3 million to settle the case. That opened up an investigation here in the Texas House. And that investigation occurred over several months and hours, hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours of interviewing witnesses with the investigators. And that led us to 20 articles of impeachment, which were, by the way, voted for. The vast majority of the Republican caucus voted for it. It wasn't. It was a bipartisan vote, but the vast majority of Republicans supported it, including everyone in Mr. Paxton's own community who represents that area. They all understood the gravity of the articles of impeachment, and they agreed with the board of managers to impeach him. And you expect these things when you have an impeachment trial. Things become very political. It is to be expected, but at the same time, it's not warranted.
Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate you.
The Democratic primary for U.S. Senate against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz is heating up. Coming up, we'll speak with State Senator Roland Gutierrez on why he's entered the race. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas comes right back. The Democratic primary for U.S. Senate in Texas is intensifying. This week, State Senator Roland Gutierrez, whose district includes Uvalde, announced he's hoping to unseat two-term Republican incumbent Ted Cruz.
To help out and fight for those who need it most.
Democratic State Senator Roland Gutierrez announced his campaign for U.S. Senate in a video released before sunrise. In a one-on-one interview today, Gutierrez explained why he's running to unseat Senator Ted Cruz.
You know, at the end of the day, Ted Cruz has been part of a problem in this state and in the United States that has been nothing more than a cancer.
Good morning, everybody. I guess it is.
Before he can challenge Cruz in a general election, Gutierrez must first win the primary and beat North Texas Congressman Colin Allred, who launched his bid in early May. Since then, Allred has raised more than $6 million and has more than $8.5 million in his campaign account. I asked Gutierrez how he can win the primary.
I'm also the candidate that's going to outwork either one of these two men. I'm going to get out and talk to people all across Texas, from the Panhandle to Brownsville, from El Paso to East Texas. We're going to have a real discussion about what ails us.
The Democrat became the most outspoken state senator in Austin to fight for increasing gun restrictions after the massacre in Uvalde last year. While his bills did not get a hearing at the Texas Capitol, he says his goals are the same if he heads to Washington.
We're going to need common sense gun reform, raising the age limit on access to weapons like an AR-15, making sure that we have extreme risk protective orders in national federal law, making sure that we close the gun show loophole.
In Dallas last month, I asked Cruz what the basis is for his reelection.
I think Texans want a secure southern border, strong law enforcement. Jobs, freedom, and security are the priorities of Texans, and that's been my priority from day one.
My only message to Ted Cruz today is get to work, man. Get to work and solve the real problems facing Texas.
Now, our full interview with Gutierrez about his priorities and why he thinks he could beat North Texas Congressman Colin Allred in the primary. Democratic State Senator Roland Gutierrez of San Antonio, thank you so much. You announced this morning that you are running for U.S. Senate against Ted Cruz. Why are you running, and what is the essence of your campaign?
Well, Jack, quite frankly, we're broken in this state. We've been broken for quite some time. For the last 30 years, we've been under Republican control, and we haven't seen really the promise that we're the benefit of the bargain. You know, we're taxpayers. We pay into a system, and we're supposed to get infrastructure that works. We're supposed to get a healthcare system that works. We're supposed to be able to have common sense gun solutions that keep us safe. You know, at the end of the day, Ted Cruz has been part of a problem in this state and in the United States that has been nothing more than a cancer. He hasn't done anything positive. When he had a chance to provide $66 billion in infrastructure money to Texas, he voted no. When he had a chance to make sure our economy kept moving forward on the debt ceiling, he voted no. When he had a chance to be able to help us with regard to the Safer Communities Act and safeguard our children, he voted no. We need people in Washington, I'm sorry, Jack, that are going to bring back the goods and services of government. When you and I were young men, our senators, our Republicans would come back and they'd say, I brought money for this highway or this hospital or this school. I provided 10,000 jobs. I created that. That doesn't happen anymore. And it certainly doesn't happen with people like Ted Cruz that are just poisoning the well of what it truly means to be an American.
Before you can run against the two-term Republican, you have to win the Democratic primary. Why do you believe you are the best Democrat in the race?
You know, Jack, I've worked all my life. I worked in my private life as an attorney and entrepreneur, and I've also worked in my public life as a city councilman, a state representative, and now a state senator. And I have a proven track record of getting big things done. We created the National Center for Warrior Resiliency, which takes wounded warriors off of opioids. We created the Farmer Suicide Prevention Act that Sid Miller, the Republican Ag Commissioner, said we saved 60 lives last year because of that program. We've got a proven record of getting things done in a body that wouldn't generally allow a Democrat to get things done. I'm going to keep working for Texans for common sense solutions. We need to start looking at how to fix our electrical grid so that 800 people don't die in a storm. The same storm where Ted Cruz ran off to Cancun while the rest of us stayed and tried to help each other out through a hard time. We need to make sure that we're trying to find solutions where people, working class people, aren't digging into their pockets to try to find out-of-pocket medical care costs. It isn't right that working class families have to spend $6,000 to $10,000 a year in out-of-pocket expenses. We need to improve our educational system. So much is broken. You can't just simply be the guy that votes no to everything and doesn't bring back anything home, doesn't bring back resources. I aim to be a senator that works for all Texans.
As you know, North Texas Congressman, Democrat Colin Allred entered the race back in May. He has a 2-month head start. He raised $6.2 million in that time period, and now he's got about $8.6 million in the bank. So how do you beat Allred in this primary?
You know, Jack, I'm no stranger to competitive races. I overturned a Republican Senate seat in the state house, in the state Senate rather. We're going to continue to work hard going forward. No stranger to raising money. I'm sure that people will get behind us and support our candidacy. But more importantly, I'm also the candidate that's going to outwork either one of these two men. I'm going to get out and talk to people all across Texas, from the Panhandle to Brownsville, from El Paso to East Texas. We're going to have a real discussion about what ails us. We're going to have real discussions about the things that matter most to people back home, about finding common sense solutions to make sure that we're making ends meet, to make sure that we're getting Medicare, our medical costs covered, to make sure our kids have a better educational system, to make sure our infrastructure and our grid are taken care of accordingly. We have to do better, but we have to talk about what truly is affecting us, not the boogeyman, not the distractions that Ted Cruz would rather have us look at.
Senator Cruz's campaign just put out a statement a short time ago. It says, quote, "We welcome Senator Gutierrez to the race. Texans will now get to watch Colin Allred and Roland Gutierrez slug it out for who can be the most radical leftist in the state. Meanwhile, Senator Cruz will continue passionately defending Texas and delivering real results for 30 million Texans." How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll only look at his tweet from this weekend, where he blasts Disney and some Barbie show for putting up a map of China. My only message to Ted Cruz today is get to work, man. Get to work and solve the real problems facing Texas. Don't start showing us your next scapegoat or your next marginalized group. Get to work, bring us resources, create positive legislation. In 12 years, Ted Cruz has had opportunities as our senator to do great big things, and he's failed time and time again. It's time he step aside and let the real workers begin to take that task up.
Texas is a Republican state, so how do you anticipate you or any Democrat is going to win this race?
Well, as I said before, Jack, you know, we are no stranger to competitive races. We beat out a Republican in this state Senate seat. So I've got a lot of experience and a proven track record in getting big things done. And I hope that Republican voters will even look at our race and say, that man's an honest broker. He's a hard worker and he's delivered for our community. As we talk about the things that matter most to Texans, most of those issues don't have a D or an R behind them. There are issues that are important to working class Texans. I aim to be that truth teller, to tell people the truth about what's going on and the lies that people like Ted Cruz are perpetrating on them. So we're going to move forward and have an honest discussion with Texans.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned some of the issues before, but what are your top priorities if you are to be elected?
Well, certainly, Jack, we're going to need common sense gun reform, raising the age limit on access to weapons like an AR-15, making sure that we have extreme risk protective orders in national federal law, making sure that we close the gun show loophole. 66% of Republicans agree with me on these things, by the way, and several polls have showed that. But Ted Cruz refuses to vote on anything positive in that regard. We need to look at fixing our electrical grid in Texas. We need to have a senator that says, look, whatever the governor wants to do doesn't matter. We're going to tie on to the eastern and the western grids to make sure that we don't have the kind of blackouts like we had during that storm again. We're going to preserve life rather than preserve money and people in big corporations' pockets. And so we don't have a senator that's doing those types of things. We're going to ensure that we look at how we're providing Medicaid expansion dollars. We need a senator that's going to create legislation to eliminate rogue governors that are not taking care of working class Texans on Medicaid expansion. People shouldn't have to dig into their pockets $6,000 to $10,000 a year to cover their Medicare costs, a basic right. And so everyone should have the kind of health insurance that Ted Cruz and Colin Allred have. We're going to be talking about those things. And so those are some of the priorities among many.
On your campaign video this morning, you mentioned reproductive rights. How key is that to your campaign?
No, absolutely, Jack. I mean, we have come to a place right now where we've had a Supreme Court just go a bridge too far when it comes to women's rights, reproductive rights, affirmative action. We're going to go back and have that discussion, and we need to have it at a federal level. And so as a senator, it's my job to make sure that all rights are protected, including the rights of women to make healthcare decisions of their own with their doctors. Absolutely.
Wanted to ask you about inflation. Some of it has come down. Gas prices have come down. But I wanted to ask you about, food is still expensive as far as some of the items in the grocery store have not gone back down. It impacts people's lives. And I'm wondering, what do you think is the best solution for that?
Well, certainly you've seen interest rates climb up to protect us against those inflationary pressures. And that's important that we try to protect us from inflation. We've seen spikes along the way in certain products like eggs. We saw a huge spike that came down. You have to go to the grocery store to actually see that, and something that I do weekly, and I talk to people about what matters most to them at home. We're going to make sure that we continue to talk to people about those issues. When it comes to inflation, we've got to continue that on this steadfast approach that the president has put us on to right the economy. We're going to get back on track. It's going to take some time. You've seen a lot of those those costs come down, as you said earlier. It's my hope to make sure that we steady the economy. When you vote against the Debt Ceiling Act, like Ted Cruz did, that's not being a steady hand in trying to correct what's going on in our economy. That's a man that wants to create chaos with our economy.
As far as that deal is concerned, there is now a looming fight up in Washington about cutting the budget, controlling spending. Where are you on that part of it?
Listen, we've got to make sure that we're spending in the right places. Obviously, we've got to make sure that we're taking care of people's Social Security, which, by the way, Ted Cruz and others want to eliminate. Medicaid and Medicare, we have to protect those federal dollars and make sure that people are getting those protections in place. We're going to do anything possible to maintain the strength of our economy. As the next senator of the state of Texas, I will make sure that I'm a steady hand at that and work with the president in that effort. I think that as we go forward, it is up to all of us to make sure that we're moving forward in the right direction. I intend to do just that.
I did want to ask you one foreign policy question. Who do you think is the United States' biggest threat? Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, or somebody else?
Well, I think China right now, Jack, honestly, and it has been for quite some time. Russia is just a paper tiger, and I think that people will start to see that over time. China, you've seen a tremendous amount of saber rattling. They have a lot of problems at home, though. And, while that is good in one sense that they need to focus on those problems, we also don't want a situation where they're so unstable that they need to create a distraction like Putin often does. Right now, they have the inverse of what's happening in the United States. We have higher interest rates to curb inflation. They have extremely low interest rates because they need to jumpstart an economy that's just dead right now because of their failed response to COVID. So we have a lot of work to do. We have to work with our allies and make sure that those people that are not our allies, that we're continue to talk to them in a diplomatic way so that we can have peace and diplomacy and democracy throughout this world. It's my hope that people can have the confidence in me to be able to have this kind of dialogue in Washington with fellow senators to make sure that we're doing the right thing, not just in the United States, but across the world.
Is there anything else you'd like people to know about your campaign?
Well, Jack, I think that what you're going to get from us is a Texan that was the son of immigrants, that fought hard, worked hard, educated himself, went on to law school. I've been an entrepreneur for many years in a lot of different areas. I've actually created jobs. I've struggled to live the American dream. I know what it takes and what people are struggling with. And we're going to have that discussion for the next several months. And I think that people are going to find that in us, they're going to get a truth teller. And we have to focus on what our problems are collectively. If we can do that, we're going to be moving in the right direction. We can get back to where we once were.
Colin Gutierrez, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. Have a good day.
You too. Some conservative groups are pushing back against the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. Details when Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas comes right back. Some conservative groups are pushing back against the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. They're doing so with a new billboard campaign and a website. We spoke with one Republican state representative from North Texas who's being called out for voting to impeach Paxton.
I feel very comfortable about the vote I took.
Republican State Representative Glenn Rogers is among the majority of House members who voted to impeach Attorney General Ken Paxton. Now, a conservative group, the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, has put up this billboard around Rogers' House District in Parker, Palo Pinto, and Stevens counties. It says he voted with 61 Democrats.
Over 70% of Republicans voted the same way I did. So they conveniently left that fact off. But our voters are smart enough to see that.
Luke Macias is the director of the Defend Texas Liberty PAC.
This is something our PAC, again, has done consistently with liberal Republicans wherever they are in the state. And so we will communicate to voters via any and all communication methods to ensure that they really know what's going on.
Paxton faces 20 articles of impeachment and has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. Should those 70%, those other Republicans, expect billboards in their communities, in their districts?
I think we're looking at billboards across the entire state. It's not just billboards, though.
There's also a new website called Stand with Paxton, created by conservative activist Dr. Stephen Hotze of Houston. The site asks supporters to call state senators who will be the jurors and urge them to acquit Paxton so he can keep his job. And the Texas GOP, along with county GOPs across the state, including Dallas, Tarrant, and Collin, have all passed resolutions condemning the process behind Paxton's impeachment. They say it's unfair because Paxton never had a chance to respond to the accusations before he was impeached.
And it's not something that we took lightly.
Republican State Representative Justin Holland also voted to impeach Paxton. Is there a rift in the GOP in Texas?
There is a rift, and it's unfortunate. I think that what we should do as Republicans is focus on these victories that we've been able to do.
Ultimately, the hope is that we actually preserve what we've fought for and created in Texas.
Representative Rogers already faces a Republican challenger next year, but he told me he isn't backing down. Paxton's Senate impeachment trial begins in the Texas Senate chamber September 5th. Senators will decide whether Paxton will get to keep his job or be removed from the office. We spoke with SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson about the conservative group's reaction to the Paxton impeachment.
Well, I think it shows that Paxton's allies believe that he has a stronger political hand than he does legal hand, and that they would like to see this process play out as a contest of political strength and political power rather than as a more strictly legal process. The old adage among attorneys is, if you have the facts, pound the facts. If you don't have the facts, pound the law. If you don't have the law or the facts, pound the table. And that seems to be a lot of what's going on here. That most of that website is a series of attacks on those who have criticized Paxton rather than an actual refutation of the charges against him. And I think that's going to be the critical thing. If Paxton is going to make any headway in fighting these charges, at some point he's going to have to offer a specific, credible refutation to the charges against him. And that's what we've heard very little of so far. Instead, most of the pro-Paxton energy has been in attacking those who have criticized Paxton or in claiming procedural violations rather than in addressing the substance of the accusations against him.
But this is a reminder that this is still a very political, this whole impeachment trial is very political. It's not legal, although the ramifications are if he is convicted by the Texas Senate, he loses his job, he's out. But this is still very political. And so I'm wondering, what do you make of the pressure that's on these Republicans sitting in the Senate?
It's important to remember that any impeachment proceeding is always a hybrid of a political and a legal process. The jurors ultimately here are elected officials. They're people who are, at the end of the day, responsible to their constituents. So therefore, they can be pressured. Now, what remains to be seen is how intense the Republican base commitment to Ken Paxton is. Would Republican base voters really be angry if a Republican senator voted to remove Ken Paxton from office? I think that's very much up in the air right now. And of course, that is the question that this campaign is trying to step into. They want to generate anger among Republican voters if Ken Paxton is removed from office. They want to create more interest and more groundswell of grassroots GOP support on behalf of Ken Paxton. So I think that is the political space this is wading into.
One other quick question, and there is a billboard campaign now that is out there. I've seen it on for one state representative, and it basically it basically calls them out for voting for impeachment. What do you make of that, and what could the potential impact be there? I would imagine that representative could face a primary challenge.
That would be where I think we would see political hay potentially made from this. There might be some Republicans who jump into primary challenges against sitting state legislators, trying to position themselves to the right of the incumbents by saying, look, this person voted with the Democrats and with the quote unquote rhinos against Ken Paxton. It remains to be seen how much traction those kinds of appeals will get, but certainly some people are at least thinking they may be able to make some political hay in primaries by going against Republicans who end up voting against Ken Paxton.
Matthew Wilson, SMU political science professor, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it as always.
All right, thanks for having me.
That's it for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.